Welcome back to Andersen Acres. Today we're taking a trip halfway around the world, at least in spirit. Hi, darling. But we're taking a trip halfway around the world to the wild heart of Australia, where one of the toughest, most adaptable goat populations on the planet has made itself right at home. I'm talking about the Australian Rangeland goat. If you've ever looked at your own herd and thought, you know what would make this more exciting? A goat that could survive the apocalypse. Well, the Australian Rangeland might be your breed. The Australian Rangeland isn't a breed in the traditional sense, not really. You won't find it neatly registered with a fancy herd book or with breeders arguing about official color patterns. Instead, it's more of a living collage of goat genetics, a mix that started when the first European settlers brought goats over in the 1800s. Those goats escaped, of course, as goats are wont to do, and they reproduced, as goats are wont to do, and they did what goats do best. They adapted. Over time, British stereotypes like Angoras and the Cashmeres and meat breeds from Africa and a bunch of these different kinds, a few odds and ends of all the different breeds, they mixed together in the vast, rugged landscapes of inland Australia. Nature, with her usual sense of humor, she decided that she could do a better job than any breeder at creating an animal that could survive blistering heat, scarce water, and scrubby vegetation, and that she could create a goat breed in an area that most goats would just fall over dead. She wasn't wrong. So when we say rangeland goat, we're really talking about generations of natural selection producing the ultimate survivor. A goat that had to earn its place the hard way. So picture the Australian Outback, dry and rocky and full of things that either bite or sting or prick you. That's the world the rangeland calls home. And it doesn't just survive. It thrives. Yes, like you on the farm. Good girl. But these special goats have an almost unfair level of hardiness. Okay, almost unfair. They can handle temperature swings from scorching daytime heat to chilly nights without batting an eye. They'll browse on shrubs and sparse grasses and random leaves, things you and I are probably going to call yard waste. Well, they're going to turn it into a lean, high-protein meat because these guys are lean and they are incredibly high protein. Because when you've adapted so well to such an unforgiving environment, well, you become the backbone of Australia's goat meat industry. Roughly 90% of all goats processed for meat in Australia come from rangeland herds because why wouldn't they? That's a big deal for an animal that no one originally set out to breed on purpose. Nobody said, let's make this goat. It just kind of happens. And if you've ever looked at photos of rangeland goats and thought, whoa, they don't look the same. Well, they don't. They're not. They come in just about every color and size and horn shape imaginable. Some are sleek and short-haired. Others are shaggier and tubby. You might see tall, narrow-bodied types and others built like miniature linebackers. They're hard to describe. What unites them isn't their appearance. It's their attitude and their adaptability. Over time, ranchers have started selecting the best of the best. The ones that grow faster and carry better muscling and handle management without reverting to their full wild mode. The goal isn't to tame them out of existence, but to turn this rugged survivor into a dependable production goat while keeping that natural toughness that they're known for fully intact. So think of the rangeland goat as the Australian equivalent of a rough around the edges farmhand who might show up covered in dust, but always gets the job done. Now you might think that a goat with generations of wild ancestry would be impossible to manage. And at one time that was true, I'll be honest. These goats were once fully feral, rounded up in massive mustering operations across thousands of square kilometers. But as the industry shifted from opportunistic harvesting to deliberate management, Producers began selectively breeding for calmer temperaments and better mothering. These days, managed rangeland herds can be surprisingly cooperative despite their heritage. They are self-reliant, not your lap goat, definitely not like Arwen, who just wants to be here and have me rub her neck forever. But they're not they might not be super snuggly, but when they're handled properly, they adapt well to farm life. If you can earn their trust, a big if because they're not the most trusting of goats, but if you can, they'll reward you with good growth rates and low maintenance living. Just don't expect them to follow you around like a little bottle baby. That's not their nature. They've still got that wild streak and they wear it proudly. Breeding it out of them is not the point. But here's the kicker. The rangeland goat is one of Australia's biggest agricultural success stories that hardly anyone outside the country actually talks about. When global demand for meat rose, Australia suddenly realized it had a massive sustainable resource wandering the outback. These goats, managed under programs that balance grazing with natural health, became a major export industry almost overnight. Their meat is lean and mild and prized in export markets. And because these goats are largely grass and shrub fed, their production is seen as more ethical and environmentally sustainable compared to more intensive systems that you might see elsewhere. That's not to say it's all easy. The goat's sheer range means they're often mustered over vast distances. You might have to use helicopters and bikes and the whole works, okay? Hi, sweetheart. I know. I love my goat. But, I mean, even with all of that, having to round them up the way they do, it's a system that's evolved with the land, and it supports both rural communities and the Australian economy. It works for all the nonsense, for all the goat craziness and the goat chaos involved in the Australian rangeland. It works. It's working. So maybe don't mess with it too much. In recent years, ranchers and scientists alike have been looking to the future of the rangeland goat. There's a growing push to improve carcass consistency because right now you can have one goat that's a compact 25 kilos and another that looks like it could bench press a kangaroo. So there's not a lot of consistency. Selective breeding programs are focusing on size, muscle, fertility, and calm temperament. Some producers cross rangeland goats with the Boer or the Kalari Reds and add basically to add that meatiness while maintaining that trademark hardiness. Some are developing pure rangeland herds to preserve the genetics of the original survivors. The result is a modern rangeland goat that's leaner, more predictable, and just as tough as its wild ancestors. But it's also a lot friendlier and easier to work with, which is a good thing. Okay, they'll never be as friendly as our one, but that's not the point. Now, of course, no conversation about rangeland goats would be complete without addressing the controversy, because when is there not some? In parts of Australia, unmanaged or feral goats are considered an environmental pest. They can compete with native wildlife, erode the soil, and damage fragile ecosystems when populations suddenly explode. That's why modern goat management programs put a strong emphasis on balance, harvesting or mustering in some areas, fencing and controlled breeding in others. Responsible producers see themselves not just as farmers, but as stewards of the land, using the goats to manage vegetation sustainably rather than running them wild. In other words, when rangeland goats are managed well, they're part of the solution, not the problem. So, why do these guys even matter? When you think about it, the rangeland goat is kind of the poster child for adaptation. It started as a hodgepodge of escapees, endured centuries of brutal outback life, and turned into one of the most economically significant goat populations in the world. It's a testament to resilience and to how animals and environments can co-evolve when left to their own devices. Every rangeland goat out there carries a little bit of history in its DNA, a blend of survival instincts, genetic diversity, and good old-fashioned stubbornness. So if you've ever met one, maybe give it a little nod of respect if you happen to see it again. That goat's ancestors survived droughts and wild dogs and hot Australian summers. It deserves just a little bit of respect. Now, before I wrap up, a couple of fun tidbits. Right, Arwen, who is still right here getting pets right in front of me. But some fun tidbits. The industry sometimes jokingly refers to rangeland goats as Australia's most successful accidental livestock, because it was an accident. In some regions, rangeland goats actually outnumber sheep. Don't tell the merino breeders. It's a bit of a touchy subject. If you're a merino breeder, don't watch this. Finally, while most countries spend a fortune on developing new meat breeds, Australia just kind of let nature handle it, which is very classically Australian. Good job. Now that is about it for us here today at Andersen Acres. Drop a comment below and tell me, have you ever worked with rangeland goats? Or do you think a breed like this would ever make its way onto small farms outside of Australia? Let me know in the comments. We'll see you tomorrow.